Hi everybody. Today we're going to be learning to use some of the features on the Crescendo, Spirit, and Unity sewing and embroidery machines. I'm going to teach you how to use the sensor pen, which allows you to use different kinds of positioning for both sewing and embroidery, and I'm going to show you how to use both the guide beam and the needle beam for sewing and embroidery respectively. If you have a Crescendo, the sewing portion of what we're doing today is going to apply to you. If you have a Spirit, the embroidery portion of what we are doing today is going to apply to you. And if you have a Unity, the whole video is going to be helpful. So we're going to begin, and please enjoy the video. So this is the Unity sewing and embroidery machine. This is the machine we're going to be doing this tutorial video on. But like I said, if you have a Crescendo or a Spirit, these things are going to apply to you as well, either for the sewing or the embroidery aspect of it. So the first thing I want to talk about is how the sensor pen mounts to the machine. Out of the box, the machine doesn't actually have this little dock plugged into it. This dock is in a separate little baggie, and there's a cover that's going to be over this little opening here. Now, if you've come in and had a lesson already, we have probably set this up for you already. But if you didn't come in for a lesson, then or you're just, you just took the machine home just now and you're watching this to see how to do it. There's a little cover, it's got a hole in it, and what you can use is a needle. You just take a needle and put it in the hole and pull out, and this opening will open up. You take the little dock here, and it just plugs straight in. It'll really only go one way, so it's kind of hard to put it in wrong. And that is going to allow you to take your sensor pen, which we're going to learn how to use here during this video, and keep it next to the machine so you don't have it flopping around, like, falling on the floor and stuff. The sensor pen has a port that actually plugs into the sewing machine too. This looks like the same kind of plug-in you'd have on an old-style mouse for your computer. This has a right and a wrong way to put it in. If you look carefully, you'll see, let's see if I get this closer to the camera, you'll see an arrow on the top of this. This arrow lines up with an arrow that's pointing, I'm going to zoom in so you can see this better. There's an arrow on this port right there, and you're going to line up the two arrows. So I am plugging my sensor pen in and lining up the two arrows and just push in and it'll go into place. Now, if you don't line up those arrows, it's not really easy to do, but it's possible to do. You can bend the pins that have the make it so that the machine can communicate with the sensor pen. So you want to be a little bit careful there. Don't be afraid of it though. It's as long as you line up the arrows, you're not going to mess it up. So I just want you to be aware of there is a right and a wrong way for that one. I'm going to put my sensor pen back in the dock here, and we're going to start playing with the actual machine. Okay, the first feature that I want to talk about is the guide beam. The guide beam is very useful and very easy to get started with. To turn on your guide beam on your machine, this is both the Unity and the Crescendo. It works exactly the same way. I'm going to zoom in here so you can see what I'm doing. This button here, it's got kind of a little shape with a red line in front of it. You are going to just touch that with your finger or with your stylus if you prefer, and it'll light up, and I'm just going to move so that we can see what happened on the bed of the machine here. It displays a red line. Put some fabric in so we can see a little more realistic what this would look like if we were sewing. It displays a red line, and by default the red line is directly in line with my needle. If you have it in the center needle position, that is. So if I were to start sewing, this red line is showing me exactly where my stitching is going to go. This is great for if you're doing stitch in the ditch, and you can use this with your stitch in the ditch foot too. So you don't have to just only use it with one special foot. This will work with any foot that you have on your machine, including the walking foot. So it's great for doing all kinds of things, and just in general, I like to leave it on so that I can see where my stitches are going to go. And you also have the ability to move this. So I can take this red line and move it around on my fabric. If I go back over to the screen here, we'll be able to see there's a little adjustment, a plus and a minus button. This is going to let me move a ½ millimeter at a time how far away my line is going to be from the center of the material. Let's take a look back at the bed of the machine. If I remove my fabric, I can see that my guide line is now on the 1/4 inch mark in the bed of my machine. So you can actually line up your guide beam using these convenient positioning markers that are built onto the needle plate. So that's nice too. Now, we also have the sensor pen with these machines. And the sensor pen is a really useful tool for placing where you want your stitches to go. The one thing that you have to do, though, before you use it is calibrate the sensor pen to you. Everybody touches and holds the sensor pen a little bit differently, just like everybody does a little bit differently with a pencil. So if I pick this up and I hold it this way, the machine is going to register a different touch from a person who's holding it this way, or even if someone is left-handed, they're going to touch it a slightly different way. So you actually have to go in and tell the machine the way that you touch, and then try to touch it that same way every time. For me, my natural way to hold this is just like a pencil, and I touch it kind of at an angle. But if you go in and touch it straight up and down, then your experience is going to be a little bit different if it's calibrated to me. It's not going to register exactly the same. So we want to make sure that our machine is calibrated, and it's very easy to do that. Now, this works the same on the Spirit, the Crescendo, and the Unity. You just go in and hit the settings page, which is this little piece of paper looking button on the machine. We're going to touch that, and on whichever machine you have, you just have to keep going through this menu. You can move left and right here. Right now I'm on page 3. I just keep going through the menu until I get to the one that says Sensor Function Calibration. It's on the same page as the light and the screen brightness display, and that's on all 3, but they're on different pages on the other machines. So if it's a Unity, that's page 6. On the Crescendo or the Spirit, you would have to page through them to see which one it is. But this is it, Sensor Function Calibration. There's a little green plus sign. This is what we're going to hit. We're going to hit the green plus sign to tell it that we want to calibrate it. And let me just zoom out a little bit so we can see. Now, this screen is telling me to touch the first point using the sensor pen as indicated, and it might look like it wants you to touch on the screen. But in fact, what it wants you to do is touch on the bed of the machine itself. On the bed of the machine, there are 2 dots. There is a small green dot right here, and there's a small green dot with a crosshair right here. This is number 1, and this is number 2. So to calibrate your sensor pen, you simply touch the first dot. The machine will make a noise and to register the fact that you touched it, and then you're going to go to number 2, you're going to hit number 2, and that's it. The machine makes another little noise, and you just go back to your screen, hit OK, and your sensor pen is calibrated. So that's all you have to do to calibrate it. It's very important that you do that, though, because otherwise it's not going to accurately register your presses. All right, now we're going to go into some of the things we can actually do with the sensor pen. To get into the sensor pen functions, there is a button on the screen. Now this is for the Crescendo and the Unity only, as we're going to be using it in the sewing mode. We're going to do the embroidery mode later. The symbol looks like a picture of the sensor pen. It's the one all the way to the right in this blue toolbar set. This is the button. So you touch the button and some choices come up. You've got, from left to right, you've got one that will allow you to set the position of the guide beam. You've got one that will set the position of the needle. This one will allow you to set the width of a stitch, and this is a stop point setting. So we're going to just go through these one at a time. The first one, the guide beam setting, I'm just going to touch that. And on the screen it says touch the guideline marker position using the sensor pen. And again, if you haven't done this before, you might think that you're supposed to be touching somewhere on this screen, but it's not. It wants you to touch on the bed of the sewing machine. So we look over here and you can see that there's a blinking red guide beam, and that's showing me where it is currently set to place the guide beam on the machine. So if I want to move this to somewhere else, say I want it to be in the middle, or if I want to go directly to my 1/4 inch marking, I can just touch my 1/4 inch marking like that and it lines up with it. So you touch anywhere on here, wherever you want that guide beam to be. So maybe I want to follow a line of stitching that I already have. Just imagine I have a line of stitching here. I can touch that line of stitching and take it so that I can follow that. Now you only have, it's about 10.5 millimeters from left to right that you can place this guide beam. So, you know, if you want to do big grid work, you're still going to need to use a quilting bar. But it's still, if you want to put decorative stitches right next to one another, this can be a great help. Now, we can still override this setting by going over to our screen. Just like before, we still have the ability to hit the plus and minus to move our guide beam. And if you look, it actually gives you a preview of what that's going to look like in your stitch area. So if we move this over to the left, I can see on the screen when I'm perfectly in line with where my needle is going to be positioned for the stitch. So that's pretty much how you use that. It's pretty simple. You just touch where you want on the fabric for the guide beam to be, and it places the guide beam there. You're not locked into where you choose because you can go and override it at any time by moving the guide beam. So the next thing that we can do with this is to change my needle position. Now this only works on a straight stitch. Any other time you adjust the needle position, you're actually changing the stitch width. And as you can see, only this one is lit up, and that's because I'm on a straight stitch right now. A straight stitch doesn't have width, therefore I can't set my width. So if I choose this option here, it now, again, it tells me to touch the needle position with the sensor pen. It's not on here, it's over there. So we're going to look back at the bed of the machine. I'm going to touch where I want my needle position to be. It moves the guide beam here. This can be a little confusing because it looks the same as when we were setting the position of the guide beam, but it's not. It's just doing this to kind of help us see where the stitches are going to end up if we move our needle position there. It doesn't actually move the needle position until I hit OK, and I'm going to hit OK on my screen. And it moves my needle position to where I chose, and it moves my guide beam back to wherever I had my guide beam set before. So that's pretty simple. Again, you just touch where you want the needle position to be, like maybe you're doing a zipper and you want to make sure that it's going to be right in the right spot where your stitching is going to go. You can just touch the side of the zipper that you want to be sewing on and go ahead and start sewing. Now, to use the next function of this sensor pen, I actually have to choose a different stitch because, as I said before, with a straight stitch it doesn't allow you to use the pen to set the width. So I'm just going to choose a regular zigzag. If you're following along at home, the stitch I'm about to use is 1-09. It's just a regular zigzag stitch. There's no real trick to what stitch I'm about to use here. But if we go back and look at the bed of the machine, I'm going to do an example of maybe I'm trying to do some applique, and I want to set how far in the bite is going to go. So my zigzag is going to go along from one side, one piece of fabric, to the other side on the other piece of fabric. I'm just going to go ahead and hit my sensor pen button. Just pan back over. So I'm going to hit my sensor pen button. This time we can see that the stitch width option is highlighted. I'm going to hit that. Now, again, you don't touch on here, you touch over here. So I'm going to pan back over and look at the fabric. It wants you to choose the right side of the stitch first. So the right side of my stitch width is what I'm choosing first. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to touch right here. And it moves the guide beam to show you where you have chosen the right side of the stitch to go. Now, you have to hit OK on the screen and it will register that first press when I hit OK now. Now it wants me to touch the second point, and it means the left side. So I'm going to go over, and I'm going to touch where I want my bite to come in at on the applique fabric. So I'm going to touch that. It places my line exactly where I touched, and I can now hit OK. And it now has set my stitch width to what I had chosen with my sensor pen, and I can go ahead and start sewing. Well, I'm not going to win any awards for sewing this one, but it did set the width to the width that I asked it to set it to. So that's how you use that one. Just remember, Here's my finished work there. So that's how you set the stitch width using the sensor pen, and that can be useful for a lot of different things. You know, different types of stitching. Maybe if you're doing a blind hem and you want to set how deep the bite is, and you want to do it visually rather than just changing the numbers, or if you're doing a quilt applique and you want to just have the bite come in at just the smallest amount that it needs to come in, that can be really useful. So the last thing that we can do with this is set where the end point of a stitch is going to be. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go in and choose the sensor pen function again, and we're going to tell it that we want to choose our end point. So what you're going to see is on the screen it's going to tell you to touch the ending point using the sensor pen. And what it means for you to do is use the sensor pen to touch the exact spot on your fabric where you would like the machine to stop. So let's look over at the bed of our machine here. You can see I've got some fabric in place. What I like to do is have my, my needle beam on so that I can see where my stitches are going to go. I have this set to be right in line with the needle. I have it set on a straight stitch. I'm going to go ahead and mark the spot on here where I want to stop with this fabric marking pen. So I mark my spot where I want the sewing machine to stop, and I'm going to go in and use my sensor pen now to touch that spot. Now you just hit OK on the screen. And when you do, it comes up with a scary sounding warning. Here it says machine will sew to ending point in one step. If length is less than 70 millimeters, the machine may not stop at ending point, which sounds like you did something wrong, but you didn't. What that's telling you is that there's only so much space in front of the needle that you're able to touch. It's about 2 3/4 inches from where the needle is. So you don't want to go too far away from the needle, otherwise the accuracy gets degraded. So you want to be really close to where you want to finish before you use this function. But as long as you pay attention to that warning and aren't scared by it, you can have some really accurate placement with this. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK and sew out my straight stitch here. And I'm just going to hit the gas pedal. It stops. I'm going to cut. And let's see how we did. My stitching is going directly up to my dot where I touch. That is pretty impressive. Now, like I said, this feature will work on all kinds of stitches, not just the utility stitches. So it's cool to do this with a straight stitch or with a zigzag, but it's also really fun to use this with the decorative stitches. We can tell it to stop our decorative stitch at whatever position we choose. So if we're going all the way down along a piece of material to decorate the fabric, we can tell it exactly where we want it to stop that. To get to our decorative stitches, we hit the decorative stitch button here next to the utility stitch button, and we have pages and pages of these to choose from. I'm going to choose just say this one with the triangles here. It's like a chain stitch. Now the button looks the same, it's just a different color. It looks the same on this screen. So it's this. Now here we have the choice between our positioning it or doing the ending point. We want to do the ending point. Now we don't have options for these two because we don't actually have stitch length and stitch width controls for this stitch. There is another version of many of these decorative stitches in another section that allows you to change the stitch length and width on them. But on the section that we're currently on, you cannot adjust them. So that's why these are grayed out. So we're going to choose the placement. I'm going to go back over to my material and tell it where I want to stop. And let's look back over at the screen because there's something I want to point out to you. If you look down at the bottom, we have an icon. The icon here shows this being on this side indicates that this pattern, when it stops, is going to stop at the end of the pattern. Whereas if this one was highlighted, it tells me that it's going to stop somewhere in the middle of the pattern. Not all designs can always be sewn out to the end of the pattern. If the design is too large or too wide, sometimes there's just no way to fit it in the space that you choose. So you want to be mindful of how large the design is when you're using this feature. But it'll tell you if it's going to work or not by whether that little spot is on the right side or the left side. And by work, I mean finish on a completed pattern and still stop in the area that you choose. So this is telling me that it's going to finish on a completed pattern and still stop in the area that I choose. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the foot control down here and begin sewing. I forgot to hit OK, so let me just hit OK, and we're going to begin sewing. Now the machine is sewing out the decorative stitch that I chose. It's going to stop where I told it to stop, and it's going to stop on the end of the completed pattern, even if it has to recalculate the stitches a little bit in order to do that. So that's a really helpful tool for if you do a lot of fabric decorating with decorative stitches. And it's just cool in general that you can tell the machine where to stop just using this little pen thing. So here it's going to stop at the end of the pattern, my complete final triangle there. Hit the scissor key, and you know, it's only a small piece of stitching here, but you can imagine if you had to go all the way along an entire piece, and then you finally get to the end and you can tell it this is exactly where I want to stop, and the machine stops in the spot that you choose. Really, really cool. So now we're going to switch over and do some embroidery. Make sure if you are using the Unity that you turn the embroidery machine, that you turn the sewing and embroidery machine off before you put your embroidery unit on. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll be back in a flash. Okay, so I now have my machine set up as an embroidery machine, and I'm going to go into the embroidery edit function so we can practice using the sensor pen to place an embroidery design. So I'm going to hit embroidery edit. We're going to go over, and I'm just going to pick some letters. So I'm going to go in and choose the fonts. I just pick a font in here. I'm going to do some medium-sized letters because I'm using the medium-sized hoop. Just type in ABC, and I'm going to set it. Go into embroidery. Now, if you look at my hoop here, I've got my fabric hooped up. So imagine that this is not just a piece of muslin. Imagine that this is a t-shirt, and we want to place our embroidery design in a specific part of the t-shirt. If you had marked before you hooped it exactly where you want your embroidery design to go, it might look something like this. Zoom in on that a little bit so we can see what I'm doing. See if we can get a look at it. What I've done is I've drawn a little arrow showing which way is up, and a little crosshair, the crosshair showing me exactly where I want the center of the design to be. If we look back over at our screen, we see our old friend, the sensor pen button. If you touch the sensor pen button on this screen, it asks first if it's okay to revert to the original position and or angle, and what that means is if I had rotated my embroidery design or moved it around in the hoop earlier, it's going to reset it, and that's fine because we're about to tell it to put the design at a different place and angle. So we're going to hit OK. It asks me to watch out for the carriage moving. I say OK. Now, on this part is where we are going to choose how we're going to be placing this design. For the purposes of this video, we're going to only stay focused on the center point here. That's the default setting right here. So you don't have to do anything here but hit OK. What this lets you do is different alignments where if I wanted to take the design and put it next to or on top of an existing design or element of the thing that I'm sewing out, you can do that. Now, if you want to see how to do that, you're going to want to come in for a video because not a video. You're going to want to come in for a lesson because I'm just not going that far in this video. But for this is kind of the most common way to want to do it anyway. So we're going to hit OK. And it tells me to use the sensor pen to set the position and angle of the pattern on the fabric in the order indicated. So what that means is first I want to touch in the hoop on my marker. I want to touch the center first. So I'm going to go over to my positioning mark and I'm going to touch the center. And then it wants me to touch which way is up. So I'm going to touch the top of my arrow pointing up. The machine makes a little noise, and I can hit OK. It's going to move the carriage, and let's take a look over here at the screen and see what it has done. It actually placed my design in the spot and at the angle that I needed to have it sew out exactly where I told it to go. That is cool. I don't care who you are. That is cool. Very, very easy to place your designs. Now, let's see what else we can do with this machine in embroidery mode using the needle beam. Now then, to activate your needle beam, you're going to go down, there's a button, it's right next door to the sensor pen button, and it's a picture of the embroidery foot with a little red dot in it, which is appropriate because when you touch this button and you look over in the bed of your embroidery machine, you get a little red dot directly underneath your needle on the sewing, on the hoop. Now this lets you do two things. One, it lets you do a trace and actually see on the fabric where your design is going to be placed. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the trace button. It looks like a little arrow going around in a square here. We're going to hit that, and then this tells it to actually do the trace. And you can see where that red dot is going on my fabric. That is the confines of the design. That way you can kind of double check your placement using something that's bright and easy to see. The other thing we can do with this is we can use it to see when we are, well, let me back up a little bit. If you have been sewing a design out and the thread were to break, you can actually take this red dot and have it display underneath your needle so you can see when you have found the pattern back on. Because the machine's going to take 10 or 20 stitches after the thread breaks before it realizes the thread is broken. And you can actually use this. You can turn this on while you're backing up through your design. Turn it on and see when you're back over the fabric or over the stitching so that you don't end up with a gap in your design. And that is a really cool thing because I can't tell you how many times I've misjudged that and ended up with a gap in a letter or even in a fill area, and it just doesn't look very good when that happens, and it always makes me frustrated. So I really like the fact that you can do that. Okay, so that's about it for using the sensor pen, the guide beam, and the needle beam. I hope you really enjoyed this video, and I hope that it helps some people who have these machines that might not be using them to their full potential. Because I know that these things can be a little intimidating when you first take them out of the box, and you might not always remember everything that we tell you during your lessons. Thanks for watching the video. See you next time.